This meeting is only for the regular students, right? So I request all the D2D student to leave this meeting and join the other meeting. This meeting is only for the regular students. D2D students are requested to join the other meeting. Okay, so I guess I am audible and my screen is visible to all. So today Deepak sir is not going to be there. He's taking another class. So I am the only one. So I kindly request or sincerely request students to give feedback and give answer to the question, because Deepak sir will not be there to give me the feedback. Okay, so I hope I am audible and my screen is visible to all. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So in the previous class, we are talking about the security aspects in computing systems. And we said that the security aspects in computing system is basically consist of three different things. That is the system security, that is the security of the computing machine itself. The second is a network security, that is the security of what device can. So basically when I say system security, I am asking myself a question that who can use the system, right? Who can use this system, right? So that is what we mean by system security. When I talk about the network security, I am asking myself that who can connect to my network, who can use my network resources, who can use my network services. So that is what you mean by network security, right? So when I say system security, that is the security of the computer itself, where we are asking this, or we are answering this question, that who can use this computing system. In the network security, we are answering this question, that who can connect to my network services and network resources. And the third kind of security is referred as the data security. And in the data security, we say that who can view or consume data, who can generate and consume data, right? Or who can actually view data, right? So that is what we mean by data security. Okay. So we said that in case of network system security, it is two things, like it is a physical security, as well as it is what we call the software-based thing. So physical security means we have to secure our computing system so that nobody can have an unauthorized access to it. Similarly, the network security also has a physical aspect, that we need to secure our computer network in such a way that nobody could come and connect to our network directly, right? Apart from the physical one, there is also another thing that we need to maintain, that is the software part of it. So in the software, we basically implement the system security via trusted systems, and we implement network security via firewalls, right? So system security is implemented using physical security and trusted systems. The network security is again implemented using physical security and the firewalls, right, as a software. And the third aspect is the data, right? That is the data which is flowing on the network, or data which is stored on a computing machine, on a hard drive, that who can access this data, who can view, edit, update, modify this data, right? So who can access, right, or who can edit, update, delete this particular data. So that is what we mean by data security, right? So let us try to first of all talk about the data security aspect, and then we'll come back to the network security and the system security aspect of it, right? So data security is basically the procedure that we do, right? Security of data is implemented using cryptography. So cryptography is nothing but it's a collection of bunch of algorithms. And what does a cryptographic algorithm do? That it converts the data into an unintelligible form, that is, it is into an unreadable form, so that even if somebody is getting access to this particular data, they will not be able to read, they will not be able to interpret that particular data, right? So in order to read or interpret this data, what you need to do is you need to convert that unreadable form into readable form again, with the help of some kind of secret key, or with the help of some kind of password, right? So this process of converting plain text, so readable data is sometimes also referred as a plain text. So I'm using this terminology here. So that will be referring to this terminology throughout our session. So I'll just mentioning it here. We'll say plain text. Plain text means it is the text, or which is called the human readable text. Sometimes I'll also call it a human readable text. Okay, and there is another related concept that is called the cipher text, right? So the cipher text is basically a text which is in a non-readable format, or it is in a non-intelligible format, right? So it is a non-readable text, right? So it is again a text message, but it is arranged in such a way that it is non-readable, it is non-interpretable, right? So cryptography is nothing but it's a process of converting the plain text data, right, into the ciphertext data. So we generate a ciphertext data from the plain text data by applying some kind of algorithm, and this algorithm in turn takes help of certain secret key or secret password, right? So we use this particular key here, right? So we provide the plain text and we provide the key value. So using this plain text and key value, we convert that particular data into an unintelligible form or unreadable form, that is called the ciphertext. And on the receiving side, we again convert this particular ciphertext back into the plain text by using the same hash code function, but this time we are passing the ciphertext as an input along with the key value, and then we'll be able to convert this particular data into plain text, right? So so this is actually this H is actually a mathematical function or a mathematical technique that is used to convert the plain text, that is the human readable text, into ciphertext, and ciphertext back into the plain text using some kind of common secret key parameter. So this particular key parameter is very important here, because somebody who's having a plain text is not having access to this particular key parameter, right? So that is why it is very important here. So this particular process of converting plain text into the ciphertext and ciphertext back into the plain text, this particular process is in general referred as the cryptography, right? So the other related term is called the cryptanalysis. What do you mean by cryptanalysis? The cryptanalysis means trying to guess what is the value of the plain text from the ciphertext without help of the key, right? So for example, you have some ciphertext available with you, and you try to predict and you try to find out what is the value of the plain text from the ciphertext, right, using some kind of function hx, right, trying to estimate it without knowing the value of the key. So this particular process is called cryptanalysis techniques, right? So cryptanalysis technique basically try to infer what is the value of the plain text from the ciphertext without actually having the appropriate value of the key, right? So this is basically what the hackers would be doing it, right? Hackers on an unauthorized user, right, or an intruder will be doing it, that they will get hold of your ciphertext data, and then what they try to do is they try to convert your ciphertext data into the plain text data without help of the key, right? So this particular aspect of cryptography, where we try to convert this ciphertext back into the plain text without knowing the appropriate key value, that is called cryptanalysis, right? So cryptography is process of converting plain text to ciphertext and ciphertext to plain text. Cryptanalysis are the studies or methods that help you obtain the plain text from the ciphertext without actually knowing the secret information, right? And this cryptography and cryptanalysis together defines a field of study that is called cryptology, right? So cryptology is a general field of study which includes both the study of cryptography, that is various methods for converting plain text to ciphertext, as well as it talks about cryptanalysis, that is nothing but the various methods for obtaining the plain text from the ciphertext without actually accessing the secret information, right? So this is what you mean by cryptography, right, and cryptology. So I have explained all these three terms: cryptography, cryptanalysis, and cryptology. Now let us try to see what kind of attacks are possible on the data, right? So we say that we need to protect data from the intruders, right? So what actually the intruders can do with our data, what kind of attacks are possible? So in general, there are two different types of security attacks are possible, right, on data. That is called the passive attack, and the other is called the active attack. So in the passive attack, the intruder or the third party is actually trying to read the messages, right, which are going in, or they simply monitor the traffic which are happening between A and B. They do not change this information. They do not, alter it, right? It is just observing it, right? It is just trying to what we call eavesdropping, right? So I think you might have heard this term eavesdropping. Eavesdropping means silently watching somebody without their knowledge, right? That is called eavesdropping. So the passive attackers basically try to observe the messages, try to read the contents, but they are silently doing it, right? They are doing it without the knowledge of the sender and receiver, and they do not mean to change the messages in any possible way, right? So what you are having a problem here is that your privacy is breaching here, and your communication is becoming open to a third party attacker, which you probably will not be preferring to do so, right? So that is what it is. So they just obtain the messages, contents, and they read the contents, right? Or they simply monitor the traffic that is flowing in between to users A and B. That is called the active passive attacks. What do you mean by active attacks? So active attacks are more damaging in terms of the loss that is occurred. So what does an active attacks do? Basically, active attacks not only just monitor the messages which are going or which are being transmitted between two parties A and B, but they also tend to modify the messages in transit, right? So they tend to modify the messages, they try to add and delete certain messages, they try to delay certain messages, right? They don't allow that message to go to the other intended party, right? Or they may generate something called a replay attack, where they actually send the previous message to the intended receiver, producing it as a new message, right? So I mean, few days back, I had this this message received on my WhatsApp saying that the government of Gujarat is going to enforce a lockdown and this and that. And when I find it out, I did some research and I came to know that this was a previous message, right? This message was actually during the lockdown period. And the same message, somebody was trying to circulate it by changing the date or something, right? So this is called the kind of replay attack. We are using the previous messages right now, or we are sending the previously sent messages to the user, right, in order to make them do something, or in order to spread some kind of misinformation or malinformation. So that is called the replay attack, right? Modifying the content attack, adding and deleting the content. And the other kind of attack, which is called the masquerade of one's identity as another, right? So it is sometimes called the impersonation, right? So many a times we receive emails and messages from the third party saying that, okay, we are from so and so bank and we have some gift card for you, you have won these many amount of money, please enter your detail and to claim your reward and stuff like that. So basically they are not the actual bank entity, but they pretend themselves to be the bank entity, and they are asking you for the passwords and OTPs and other information, right? So these are called the impersonation or masquerade type of attacks. So impersonation means trying to pretend to be something else, right? So I try to pretend to be a bank employee, or I try to pretend to be a credit card company, or I try to pretend to be a university person sending you an email and saying that all the sessional examinations are cancelled, just to create havoc or something like that, right? So this is another kind of, so these are called the active attacks, where you have a person impersonation with sender or receiver impersonation, and then we have replay attack, replaying the previous valid messages, and then modifying the messages in transit, adding and deleting messages, and the worst kind of attack could be the denial of service attack, in which we simply put up a blockage between sender and receiver, so that the sender is not able to send data to receiver and receiver is not able to communicate back. So we are just creating a communication gap there, so that those messages are not reaching to one and another end, right? So A is simply not able to reach B, and B is simply not able to reach A. So that is called the denial of service attack. So these are the different kinds of attacks which are possible on the security system. The next thing is, what are the objective of an information security or a data security system, right? So when I implement a data security, what I expect that particular system to do, okay? So any information security or data security system, it is expected to provide confidentiality, it is expected to provide authentication, it is expected to provide data integrity, it is expected to provide availability of data. Now let us try to understand one by one what these words are. These are very important words, and if you talk about network and cyber security, or if you're looking for a career in cyber security, maybe later on, this is something which will be coming after you over and over again, right? So plus try to understand these words very carefully. So what is confidentiality? Confidentiality means secrecy, right? So something which is to be disclosed to only a certain group of people, we called it confidential, right? So it is not to be disclosed to everybody, right? You have written a letter and you want only your friend to open that letter and not anybody else. So that is what you mean by confidentiality. So one of the objective of information security system is that the message that you are sending should only be opened up by the intended sender, and should only be opened up by the intended receiver. That is, only the sender and intended receiver should be able to see the content, should be able to understand the content, and should be able to act upon the content, not anybody else, right? So that is what we mean by confidentiality. If A is sending to B, only B should be able to read it, not anybody else, right? We cannot make sure that the message will only be received by B, because this is the wild word, right? I mean, www is sometimes called wild word, right? Why it is wild, wild world? Because there are so many intruders, there are so many networks, there are so many systems. All these systems are not in our control. We see there are certain countries who actually encourage this kind of illegal activities, like Ukraine and something like that. So there are so many countries which are very infamous for this. So you cannot control what is there in the wild, wild world. So you cannot make sure that the message that you are sending is only received by the intended person. But what we need to make sure is that even though somebody else is receiving the message, that person is not able to interpret the content of the message, right? Message is readable, a message is receivable, but it is not readable. That is what we are trying to achieve here. So that is what we mean by confidentiality. One of the major objective of the information security systems is to implement confidentiality, right? That is number one. Number two, authentication. Authentication means both the sender and receiver need to confirm each other's identity, right? If you receive a message from A, how do you make sure that this message is actually coming from A and not from somebody else? For example, you receive a mail tomorrow that your CCN exam is postponed or your CCN exam is cancelled. How do you make sure that this message is actually coming from a legitimate university authority, or it is coming from somebody else who's trying to impersonate, or who's trying to be somebody who actually it is not, right? So we have seen these cases happening in the past, that somebody has actually floated a mail on the name of some faculty, right? So this is called the impersonation problem, right? So how do we make sure that, right? So one of the objective of information security is to allow the sender to verify that it is the actual receiver, and allow the receiver to verify that actually who is actually the sender, right? So allowing sender and receiver to verify each other's or to confirm each other's identity, that is called authentication, right? The third point is data integrity. That's very common, very simple. Data integrity means that the message that A has sent and B has received, it is intact and it is not being modified in between, right? So when the message is going from A to B, how do we make sure that this message is not modified in between, and this message is actually is actually the one which is being sent by the sender A, right? So that is called the data integrity, that the content of the communication is not altered during the transmission. That is what we mean by data integrity. Next is availability. Availability means that A should be able to access B, B should be able to access A, or any data should be made available to the authorized entity, right? See, there are two things here. The data should not be made available to unauthorized people. At the same time, the data should be made available to authorized people. See, if I want to protect something, how do I do it? So the best way to protect is that put everything inside a box and then lock it down. That's simple as that, right? So I just keep a machine, I disconnect the machine from all the network, and I just keep that computer in lock and key and put all the data inside it. Or maybe I can keep all the data in my pen drive and then put that pen drive inside the locker. That is the best way I can protect that data. But then that data is not available to somebody who is authorized to access it. For example, I am creating a CCNA course content, right? I'm creating PPTs and materials and all those things, which I'm supposed to share with the CCN students of this class, right? BTech IT 4th semester class. But at the same time, I do not want this content to be available to some EC students or some, say, computer student or something else, right? Let us assume that hypothetical scenario. I want to make data to available to the authorized person. At the same time, I do not want that data to be made available to the unauthorized person. So the best way to protect my data is that I create a content and then I put it into the pen drive and then I put the pen drive in the locker box. That's simple as that. But then I will also be making it unavailable to the authorized people. Who is the authorized person or who is the authorized group? The BTech IT 4th semester student, right? So I have to put it somewhere so that my student can access that material, right? So I have to make it available for those who are authorized, and I have to make it unavailable for those who are not authorized. So that is what we mean by availability of data. Okay. The next is non-repudiation. Non-repudiation means that any entity which is sending any messages cannot deny afterwards that this message is not sent by me. I mean, for example, if I send you a message that the CCN examination is cancelled, and then later on, and then you do not appear in the exam, and then you complain it, this is the message we received from MMG sir, and I say, no, I didn't send any of such messages. It is all fake. This is what you mean by non-repudiation. Non-repudiation means trying to deny some of the previous communication or denying some of the messages or some of the contents being sent in the past, right? So a person should not be able to deny that, right? So you should have some mechanism to verify that this is indeed sent by MMG sir, right? So there has to be some mechanism to verify that, okay, this content or this message was delivered or this message was indeed sent by a particular sender A, and sender A cannot deny that, no, I didn't send this message. This was somebody else, but they have used my name. So this should not happen, right? So that is called non-repudiation, right? So that is what is one of the goal of information security, to make sure that the receiver is able to confirm that the sender, the message was indeed sent by the sender itself, right? So that is called non-repudiation. The next is the access control. Obviously, an entity cannot access any entity that is not authorized, right? So this availability and access control, these are the two aspects of the same coin. Availability means authorized people should access. Access control means the unauthorized people should not access, right? So that is called the access control. And finally, anonymity means that the identity of an entity is protected from the others, right? So who is sending message to whom? This identity must be protected from all unauthorized users, right? So obviously the sender would be able to verify the receiver would be able to verify the sender, but apart from the sender and receiver, nobody else should be able to came to know that, okay, this communication is happening between which two users, right? So the identity of the sender and receiver should be protected from the others unauthorized users. So that is what we mean by anonymity, right? So these are the different objective of an information security system. And how do we obtain this objective, or how do we achieve this objective? So these objectives are basically achieved using various kind of cryptographic algorithms. And there are basically 3 different types of cryptographic algorithms which are used very heavily. That is called the secret key algorithms or functions, public key algorithms, right? Secret key algorithms, sometimes also called symmetric key cryptography algorithms. Public key algorithms, sometimes also referred as asymmetric key cryptographic algorithms. And finally, we'll also use hash function. So hash function is not actually encryption, but hash functions are very useful sometimes in validating the integrity of the message and digital signature. So we'll also try to see what is hash function. Please remember, this is not the hash that you study in your data structure, right? It is something different, right? So this is the hash function with reference to the network security, right? So I mean, the usage is different. Maybe functionally it may be similar, right? But usage is different, and therefore we should be taking that in the different contexts, right? So that is it. So what do you mean by secret key function, or what do you mean by secret key algorithm? So secret key cryptographic algorithm means there is only one single key, or there is only one particular shared key. The same key is used to generate the encryption, and same key is used to generate the decryption. So basically, when I say cryptography, it's a combination of 2 functions, encryption and decryption function. So the role of the encryption function is to convert your plain text into ciphertext with the help of key. Okay. So if I want to put this in terms of equation, so that is how I'll put it in terms of equation. Okay. So I'll say that I had the ciphertext which is generated from the plain text with the help of the encryption algorithm and with the help of the key, right? That is called encryption. What is decryption? The decryption means generating plain text from the ciphertext with the help of the same key. So that is called the decryption process. So as you can see, that encryption and decryption are basically inverse of each other, right? So encryption and decryption is basically inverse of each other, right? So I hope you know the inverse function, right? From your mathematical understanding, you know the inverse function, right? So this encryption is basically an inverse function of decryption, right? And decryption is inverse of encryption. And one another thing is that when I apply encryption and decryption, when I apply this inverse function, I should be able to reconstruct the original plain text message without any error. So this is a kind of lossless conversion. So I hope you understand that whenever we do transforms, right? So basically what we are doing is we are transforming this plain text P into ciphertext C, and then we are transforming the ciphertext back into the plain text. So this transformation process is the inverse transform. So we can say that E is a transform, D is the inverse transform, And we know that this particular transformation process has to be lossless. What do you mean by lossless? Lossless transformation process means that the original data or the original plain text should be recovered without any error from the ciphertext. So that is what you mean by the lossless transformation, right? So encryption and decryption is basically the transformation and inverse transformation, but you can say that this is the lossless transformation. That is, the plain text is to be recovered 100% without any error from the ciphertext. And this transformation, encryption and decryption, it basically depends on one single key parameter that is called a secret key parameter, right, which is used to drive this particular process, right? So this is why it is called a symmetric key, because the same key is used for encryption and decryption both. So therefore it is called the symmetric key. It is also called the private key encryption or private key cryptography. Why? Because this key is a secret. Only A and B knows or have the value of this particular key, right? So this key is only need to be shared between the two parties, like A and B. If they want to communicate, they have to use this key. If A want to communicate with some other party C, then you have to use a different key. If A want to communicate with D, then you have to use a different key. If D want to communicate with B, then they have to use a different key, right? So this particular key is private to only the sender A and receiver B, or say sender B and receiver A. So the communication between A and B is actually made possible with the help of the secret key, and it is private to only A and B, and therefore this particular key is referred as the private key. And this kind of cryptographic algorithms are referred as private key cryptographic algorithms. Okay. So SKC means the symmetric key cryptographic algorithm. Let us try to see what are some of the issues or usages of secret key cryptographic algorithm. So transmitting an insecure channel. So when you want to transmit a data or an insecure channel, assuming that you want to transfer the ciphertext on the internet, right? So we know that internet is an insecure thing because we don't know who else is connected on the internet, who other users are there. So we do not know how our data is moving in and where it is going through, right? What are the intermediate device it is going through? So it may be possible that you are sending a message which is going through some intermediate server which is there in Ukraine or Afghanistan or Iraq or something, and there is a very high possibility that those data gets captured from there, because those are the countries who do not have very strict law enforcement agencies, right? So we do not know how our data is traveling on the internet and who are the people connected on the internet and who are their actual identity. So therefore we say this is an unknown public network. So when we are trying to send a data over the unknown or unsecure public network, we need to implement encryption, right? We should not be sending data onto such an internet or onto such public networks without actually encrypting it or by making it in a plain text form. See, if I'm trying to transfer data within DDU, then probably that is not an issue because I know that who are the people connected to DDU, right? I can even control who has get access to data, right? And even if somebody captures the data, I had a mechanism to find out that who has captured the data and how they have utilized that particular data, right? So if I'm talking about communicating data between the computers within a private organization or within a local area network, probably I can think of sharing data as it is, right? But when I talk about communicating data over internet or public network where we do not know exactly who is connecting and who is controlling it, therefore we need to implement this kind of secret key mechanism in order to protect our data. So what you do is you generate a plain text data, convert it into encrypted form or ciphertext, and then you send the ciphertext data on the network, right? So receiver will receive the ciphertext data and then will decrypt it and will convert it into the plain text. Even there is some third-party agency which is there, right, which is trying to utilize or which is trying to extract this particular data, then they will not be able to interpret what that data is. They will be getting a data which is in an which is in an unreadable form or which is in a unintelligent form, right? So this is transmitting data over an insecure or public channel. We can use the symmetric key encryption. Secure storage of unsecure media. For example, you are trying to store a data on a public cloud, or you are trying to store data on the university FTP, right? So everybody knows that we had an FTP server where anybody can connect and anybody can store their data. So you are storing your private data on such public platform like public clouds or public FTPs, and you can do that because they are freely available, so you can use those platforms. But then if you store your secret data or if you store your sensitive data in a plain text form, then actually anybody can access that data and anybody can see that. Okay. So in this particular case, it is very much advisable that when you are storing data on such an insecure or public media or public platform, those data must be encrypted form, right? So you have to first encrypt the data and then put that data into the public cloud or put that data into the public FTP site, right? So that even somebody could actually read that data or even somebody could capture that data, but they will not be able to interpret that data. Only you will be able to read and interpret it because the secret key is only lying with you, or maybe anybody to whom you want to share the data. You can share the public key with those guys, and only those guys would be able to download that data, and only those guys would be able to interpret that data, right? So that is why it is. So you can see that in many of the e-commerce business, when people are selling textbooks and when people are selling softwares online, what they do is they allow people to download the softwares and they allow people to download the PDF book, right? But then when you try to open the software or when you try to open the PDF book, it is encrypted, so you're not able to see the content or you are not able to open that file. So in order to open that file, you have to get the key from that particular agency or from that particular company. Okay, so that is how they are doing it, right? So that is what we should be using the secret key cryptography, right? Transmitting data over the insecure channel and storing the data on the public media or public servers. We should be encrypting our data. Okay. Security. So basically what we are trying to do is we are trying to provide the confidentiality, right? So confidentiality is something which we are ensuring here, that only intended parties can see it. We are also ensuring the data integrity, because once it is encrypted, we know that nobody could change it. Even if somebody changes it up, then we came to know that there is a change, because then it won't be decrypted properly, right? So that is data integrity is also ensured. The third is authentication. Authentication means anybody who is having the key will be able to read the data. So we can control who is having access to the key, and by that we can control the identity of the other parties which are involved in. Availability, obviously we are sharing it on the public media, so it is becoming available to anybody or the intended authorized user, right? But the authorized user will only be able to, in fact the data is available to everybody, but they will only the authorized user will be able to interpret it or read it, right? So that is what we are doing it. So these are the different aspects of the information security or objectives of the information security that we are able to fulfill through the symmetric key cryptographic algorithm. Okay, so again, we can also implement a kind of authentication mechanism. So for example, A is trying to send data to B. So first A would like to verify that, okay, the person receiving data on the other end is actually B and not anybody else, right? So this happens many times when we are having the I mean, you might have seen this in movie or somewhere, that when we are making call to I mean, in the older days, we don't have to have these mobile phones, right? We only have one telephone in the house, which is common, which is shared by everybody, right? So whenever we used to make a call, we have to first verify that whether it is intended user or not, right? So first we have to keep some secret code, right? Then our friend pick up the phone and then we'll ask him to speak out that code. And when he speak out that code, then we go and talk with each other, right? Then the communication goes further, right? Like that. Okay, so just trying to identifying the identity of the receiver or the intended receiver. So before actually the communication starts in, if A would like to verify the identity of B, or B would like to verify the identity of A using symmetric key, how it is possible? So this is normally what is done. That is called the challenge handshake protocol, right? Or CHAMP. Sometimes it is also called CHAMP. I think this CHAMP you might have already seen in the HCL or PPP algorithm, right? So it's a kind of a very similar version here. So user A will generate a random number we call the challenge, and then it will send this particular random number to B. Okay. Now, in order to verify the identity of B, what B has to do, B will encrypt this particular this particular random number A using the key KB. What is key KB? Key KB is a secret key which is shared between A and B. Key KB is a secret key which is shared between A and B only. Right? There is no other party who's actually having access to this particular key. So what happens that A will send a random number to B. B is supposed to encrypt this particular random number using this key and send it back to A. Now what A will do? A will decrypt this particular encrypted challenge using the same key AB, right? And then we'll verify that indeed it is the original value which is being sent by A, right? So what is happening here, that we try to encrypt this particular value of RA using this particular key, right? Which is this key AB, right? So KAB, that is the key that we'll be using here, right? So in this particular case, will be, so this particular information is what we are sending here, right? So this is the information which we will be sending here, right? And now what we'll do, that this particular the receiver will try to sorry, I'm not able to list it up, just a minute. Okay, so this particular receiver will try to decrypt this message, right? So receiver is going to decrypt this particular message. So when you receive this particular message here, the encrypted message is received here. Okay, the same encrypted message now you have to decrypt. Okay, using the same key. Again, key remains the same. So I hope you understand the process, right? Decryption of encrypted value of RA using KB. So this should produce the original challenge value A. So this is how you can put this in terms of equation. Okay, so this is how you should be putting this in terms of equation. Okay, so a challenge is sent by A to B. B will encrypt it using key KB, send it back to A. A will decrypt this content using key KB again. And what A should be getting? A should be getting the value of RA back. Then we say that, okay, A has verified the identity of B, or A is ensured that, okay, the intended receiver on the other end is indeed B and not anybody else. Similarly, if B would like to verify the identity of A, then B will send a challenge value to B. So that's a random number. It will generate a random number. We'll send this particular random number to A. A will encrypt this particular random number using key AB, send it back to B. Now B will decrypt this encrypted value using the same key AB, right? And then it should be able to generate the random number RB again back, right? If it is there, then we can say that, okay, B has successfully verified the authenticity of A, or B has made sure that, okay, the sender is indeed A and not anybody else, right? So this is called the authentication process using secret key cryptography, right? But secret key cryptography are, so integrity check can be done, right? Non-cryptographic checksum. So how do we do the integrity check? So in order to verify the integrity of the message, we tend to generate the checksum of the message, right? And then this particular checksum is in turn encrypted using the private key, right? So even if somebody is modifying the content in between, then the checksum value and the message value does not match, right? So we generate the checksum, right? And when the receiver receives a message, the receiver also generates the checksum, and it will verify the received checksum along with the computed checksum, and that is how it will verify the integrity of the message. So integrity verification is actually similar to the error correction mechanism that we have already seen in data link layer and in application layer, right? So what is the error correction mechanism? You generate a CRC code, you generate a checksum, and then you send that checksum and CRC code along with the frame header or frame tailor or some the header part of it, right? Header part of the message. And then when the receiver receives the message, receiver will also generate the checksum, and then it will verify that whether there is no change in the data or not, right? So this is how the integrity of the data can be verified with the help of checksum, right? But this checksum in this case is also encrypted along with the data. So therefore, nobody is actually able to modify and generate a new checksum, right? So if the new checksum is generated and the data is modified, then this two value does not match. Okay, so this is called the cryptographic checksum. So one of the very popular method for generating a cryptographic checksum is called the MAC code. MAC is, again, it's not a medium access control here. The meaning of MAC in this case is called the message authentication code. So message authentication code is a kind of a technique for generating the checksum, where it will convert the random size data block or random size message into a fixed size block, right? So the purpose of the MAC is to generate a random message, right? So purpose of the MAC is to generate or to convert, right, a random message M. So M can be of any length. This should be converted into fixed block B, right, in such a way that there is a unique one-to-one mapping between M and B. That is, if the value of M changes, B should also change, right? So there is no two message M1 and M2, right, should have the same value B1 and B2. If M1 and N2 are different, B1 and B2 should also be different. So this is called the cryptographic checksum that is generated using MAC. And then this checksum along with the message is encrypted, right? So now I am not only encrypting the message itself, but now what I'm doing is I'm encrypting the message along with the checksum, right? So along with the checksum is encrypted using the key K, right? And then this particular message is sent on the other end. So on the receiver side, the receiver will decrypt this particular message, right? Also will decrypt this combined value here, and then will extract the message, right? Will compute the checksum and will verify whether the computed checksum is same as the received checksum. If it is yes, then we say that, okay, the message is intact, it is not being modified, and the integrity of the message is preserved. So that is how we can make sure that the integrity of the message is preserved. Okay, so that is how you can use the symmetric key cryptography. But one of the problem with the symmetric key cryptography is that how do we secretly transfer the key from A to B, right? So the success of the entire process depends on that the value of the secret key is only available between A and B. So how do I transfer the value of the keys, right? So the data transmission can happen with the help of key, but how do I transmit the key itself, right? Key ko bhi kaise transmit karenge, right? If your friend is studying with you in the class, you can personally meet each other and you can exchange keys. That is one thing. But let us say that you are trying to communicate with somebody who's there in US or UK or somewhere. How do you secretly communicate this key so that only these two parties are able to get the value of the secret key? And what if the key value itself is compromised, right? So if the key value is compromised, then entire communication is compromised. All the messages that you send from A to B and all the messages that you receive from B to A, right? All these messages are compromised if the single key is compromised here, right? So sharing the value of the secret key. So how do we secretly transfer the secret key? That is the problem here, right? So I hope you try to understand. In the symmetric key cryptography, the major issue is how do we secretly transfer the secret key, right? So that is the problem, okay? So key dissemination, in general, this is called the problem of key dissemination. So how do we disseminate key in such a way that it is securely reaching on to the other end? So in order to address this issue of key dissemination, the designers have come up with a different kind of encryption algorithm that is called the public key cryptography, or sometimes called the asymmetric key cryptographic algorithm. So what is happening here, that in the asymmetric key cryptographic algorithm, there are two keys, right? One is referred as the private key and the other is referred as the public key. So normally the private key will be referring by D and the public key will be referring by E. So what is a private key? The private key is the one that the user kept with themselves only. They do not share this key with anybody else, right? Your private key is only available with you and nobody else, right? That is what you mean by private key. So that is why it is called private key. So B generates a key pair. So B is generating a pair of keys. One key is called the private key, which is kept with the B itself and not shared with anybody else. Whereas the other key is called the public key, and this public key can be given to anybody. Even you can post that key on your website, right? So if I want you to communicate with me in a secure manner, I will share my public key and I will open that particular public key. I'll put it on my website, or I can simply save it through emails or any other mechanism, right? Because it is anyway public key, so it is not to be maintained secret. Okay. So how this public and private key happens now, or how this public and private key function? So any message which is encrypted using public key can only be decrypted using private key, and any message which is encrypted using private key can only be decrypted using public key. So this is the property of this algorithm. I'm just again doing it. Any message, so this message is encrypted using E, then this message will only be decrypted using the public key D. If the message is encrypted, so this M is the original message, right? E is the public key and D is the private key. So if I encrypt the message using E, that is, if I'm encrypting the message using public key, then this message will only be decrypted using private key D. Then and then I'll be getting the original message M back. The other day is that if I encrypt the message using the private key D, then the only way I can decrypt this particular message is using public key. Then again, I'll get the original message M back. But if I encrypt and decrypt it using the public key only, okay, then I will not be able to get the original message back. Then this is not equal to M. Okay. So I'll not be able to get the original message back. Similarly, you can say that if I use the same key for encryption and decryption, private key and public key, then also this is not going to happen. So that is how you have to use the value of public key and private key. If you encrypt something using public key, you have to decrypt it using private key. And if you encrypt something using private key, you have to decrypt it using public key. Then and then the original message can be retrieved back. Okay, so that is what the property of public key and private key is. So since there are two keys now, we have a different key for encryption and decryption. Therefore, this is referred as asymmetric key cryptography. उसको symmetric बोलते थे. क्यों symmetric बोलते थे? Because same key was used for encryption and same key was used for decryption. Whereas in this case, I'm using one key for encryption and the other key for decryption. Therefore, since there are two different keys used for encryption and decryption, therefore, this particular kind of cryptography is also referred as asymmetric key cryptography. Hope that makes sense? Okay. So that is how it is different, right? It is also called public key cryptography. Why? Because you did not to maintain the secrecy of the key. That is one part of the key, and let anybody use that key to connect with you in a secure way, right? So that is why it is called the public key cryptography. Now, what are the usages of public key cryptography? Obviously, transmitting content over an insecure channel, right? If I want to transmit a message A on the public network, or I want to transmit it on internet, I can actually encrypt it using a private key and then decrypt it using public key, or I can encrypt it using public key and decrypt using private key. I mean, anything is possible. So transmission on the insecure channel, it is possible using public private key. Security or storing the content on the insecure media or public platform or public FTPs, right? Or cloud, right? Public cloud or public FTPs. Again, as I said, you have to encrypt your data and then put it there. So again, you can use. So for example, now I want to share content with my class only. So I said that, okay, I want to share the content with my class only. Then what I can do is I can actually encrypt data using my private key and then made it here available there. And then only those people who are having access to my public key, they would be able to download and they would be able to see that material. All other people, even though the material is there, but will not be able to download it and interpret it. So that is how I can control who can actually access those material there. Okay. So that is called the secret storage. So you want to transmit the data on the insecure channel. You want to store the data on the insecure media. Then also this public key cryptography can be useful. Public key cryptography can also be useful for authentication purpose. So if I suppose want to encrypt, or if I want to verify that whether the other party, like A, would like to verify that the receiver is B only and not anybody else, then what you can do is that A could generate a random number R. This random number R is encrypted using public key of B. this particular random number R is encrypted using public key of B. Since it is encrypted using public key of B, who's going to decrypt it? Who's going to decrypt it? This particular random number is encrypted using public key of B. So it can only be decrypted using the private key of B. And who is having private key of B? Only B is having private key of itself, right? Nobody else in the world has the private key of B. So you select a random number, you send the random number by encrypting it using the private public key of B. B receives a random number, decrypts the number using its own private key, and then sends the number back to A. And when you receive this number A, then you verify that, okay, whether the received number is indeed the same as the one I generated. If yes, then we have successfully verified the identity of B. Right? Similarly, we can verify the identity of A by generating a random number and then encrypting the random number using the public key of A. So therefore, now only A can decrypt it using its own private key, and therefore you can verify the authenticity of A. So you can use it for transmitting over insecure channel. You can use it for storing data on the insecure media. You can use it for authentication purpose. You can even use this for implementing what is referred as the digital signature, just to avoid the non-repudiation. Right? Digital signature means what? For example, I would like to send a message to the people, right? Saying that okay, your CCN exam is postponed, right? So we're going to take it in the next week, right? So I just want to send this message that the CC exam for BTech IT semester 4 is postponed due to some XYZ reason. So when I'm sending this message, how as a receiver, how do you make sure, or how do you verify that okay, this message is indeed coming from MMG sir and not anybody else? How do I do that? So if I want to send this message, I would encrypt that message using my private key. So if I encrypt that message using my private key, obviously now I am authenticating myself. I am putting my signature on that, because I am the only one in the entire world who has my private key. There is nobody else who is having my private key. It is my responsibility to keep that secret. So when you receive this message, you try to decrypt the message using my public key. So if the message is successfully decrypted using my public key, what it means? It was generated using my private key. And if it is generated using my private key, obviously the message was sent by me itself and nobody else. So that is how the receiver is ensured that, okay, this particular message is indeed coming from MMG sir and not anybody else. What is the other way around? Other way around is that I cannot deny that I didn't send this message. Somebody, let's say university office comes in and asks it, who told you that the exam is postponed? It is not postponed. It is on the regular schedule. Then you say that, okay, we received this message from MMG sir. And I said, no, I didn't send it. It is not possible for me. Why? Because you are able to decrypt that message using my public key. Therefore, the message was generated using my private key, and therefore the message was generated by me. I am the sole responsible for that particular message. I am the person who is the sole responsible for that message. I cannot deny it. I cannot do non-repudiation, right? So you can provide digital signature just to make sure that there is no non-repudiation, right? So see, today you might have seen that digital signatures are there. I mean, when you receive a document, it is written at the bottom saying that this document is digitally signed. What do you mean by document is digitally signed? A part of that document is encrypted using the private key of the sender, which can be verified. A part of that document or part of that file contains a code which is encrypted using the private key of the sender. Right? See, sometimes you did not to hide the message. Sometimes you only want the message to be verified, or sometimes you only want the message to be, a message to be encrypted, right? But not hide the original message. So what happens here, that we had the original message, and this original message, say for example, this particular message is M. This particular original message is combined with what is referred as the hash code, right? Or some kind of MAC code, or some kind of CRC code, right? Or some kind of checksum, right? So I generate the hash code, say for example, MAC code. And then what I do is that I have the original message, I generate the MAC code, and then this MAC code is actually encrypted using my using my private key, right? So what is my private key? Say for example, E is my private key. Then that is how I'll be doing it. So now the original message itself is not encrypted because we did not do, I mean, the message is public. We wanted everybody to read it, but we also want people to verify that this message is indeed coming from A. So this MAC code is generated from the message itself, right? So I cannot say that, okay, this MAC code is not generated by me because it is same as this message. Since this MAC code is encrypted using my private key, that is, I am authorizing the content of this particular message because MAC code is generated from the content of the message. And then that MAC code is encrypted using my private key. So basically what I'm doing is that I am authorizing or I am approving the content of this particular message. So that is the signature, right? So if somebody would like to say that, okay, whether this message is indeed coming from MMG sir, yes, you go and check the MAC code. You have the message, right? You generate the MAC code of the message, right? So what do you do now? You have the message. From the message, you generate the MAC code. Okay, so you generate a new MAC code. Okay, generate a new MAC code here. And then you already had this encrypted MAC code. Now what you do is you decrypt this particular MAC code. How do you decrypt this MAC code? You have to decrypt the code using the public key of the sender because it was generated using private key. So you have to decrypt it. So I'm calling this content X, right? So let us call this content here encrypted content. Let us call the encrypted content as X. So what I'm asking here is to decrypt this encrypted content using the public key of the sender, right? So say this is my private key, this is my public key. So this decrypted message should be same as this one. So these two should match, right? These two should match. So I have to compare these two. The received message is actually compared with the decrypted message. So that is how I'll make sure that this content is actually indeed coming from a particular sender. And not only that, I'm also authenticating the integrity of the message, that this message is not changed in between, right? Because by verifying the MAC code. So MAC code is like a checksum, right? So if the content is changed, the MAC code will also change. So if somebody has modified the content in between, let's say M was the original content, but somebody modified it to be M1, then this MAC code here will also be different. That will become MAC1. So when this become MAC1, then these two will not match because this is the encryption of MAC. This generated code is MAC1 and this will not match. So I can say that, okay, the message is modified. It is not in the original form. Okay. So that is how you can use the digital signature to verify the integrity of the message, at the same time to provide guard against the non-repudiation. Non-repudiation means I cannot deny that this message is sent by me. Why? Because the MAC, the signature is generated using my private key, so I cannot deny this message to be true, right? I have sent it, right? I am the responsible person for this message. Why? Because it was encrypted using my private key. Hope that makes sense. So this is how the public key cryptography is used. So I'm taking a little break here in between. So before we go to the hash function, let me know that you understand this concept. That is what is cryptography, what is encryption, decryption, what is plain text, what is ciphertext, what is symmetric key cryptography, and what is public key crypto or asymmetric key cryptography, and how do we achieve these objectives of information security, that is confidentiality, integrity, availability, and so on. Let me know if you have any doubt on this. I'm taking a little pause here and then we'll continue with the next topic. You can also go and take some water or a little break for 5 minutes if you want. Okay. And then again, come back to the class. Meanwhile, if you have any doubt, you are free to raise the doubts. We'll be again continuing after 5-10 minutes. Any doubts related to these topics discussed so far?
Wait for some time.
Okay, so any doubt related to cryptography, public key, private key, symmetric, asymmetric, objective of information security, digital signature, and related stuff? You can raise your doubt. If you don't have any doubt, you can just give me the feedback that you don't have any doubt, it is clear, so that I can move ahead with the next topic. Hello, is anybody there? Am I audible? Thank you. So do you have any doubts on this? Okay. See, whenever I ask questions, I can see some similar faces or some similar names answering it. What about the other students? What about the rest of 116 students? Right. How to set up the public key? Yes, this is there. In fact, it's very easy. In Linux, you have a functionality called SSH key gen. Okay, SSH key gen. So you can actually go and type this command SSH key gen, SSH key gen. So when you type this command SSH key gen, it will ask you where do you want to save these keys. So these keys are normally saved in the folder called /home/IT staff/.ssh folder /ID RSA. RSA is the name of the algorithm which is used to generate public keys. Okay, so you can keep the default location there. You can simply press enter. There are already files available. So do you want to overwrite them or no? Say yes, I want to overwrite it. And now it will ask you the passphrase. It will ask you some password from which it will in turn generate the keys. So for example, I can add any secret information here. My secret. It will ask me to enter it again. And the keys are generated. Okay. If I want to view those keys, I can definitely go to that location. Can say cat. It is in the home directory. IT staff is a user. .ssh folder. Right. I can go there, cd to this folder, and I can check that there are two files available, ID RSA, which is my private key, and ID _RSA _pub, that is my public key. So then I can actually use this information, cat ID RSA, this is the value of my private key. Right? RSA private key begins. This is the value of my private key. And then I can have the public key information like this. This is the value of my public key. Then I have to share this file ID _RSA.pub with the other party. And then you can use this encryption decryption process. So in website, normally we do SSL, right? So for SSL, we required to set up the what we call the certificate, right? SSL certificate. And then we need to sign that certificate using our private key. And then anybody having access to the public key will be able to verify our authenticity. So before accessing the website, what it will do is, suppose I am trying to access the website of HDFC Bank. So the moment I do the HDFC Bank website, I could mention that I want to access that website in a secure way. So instead of writing HTTP, I have to mention I want to do HTTPS. HTTPS means I want to have a secret way of communicating with this website. So I say HTTPS www.abc.mybank.com. So what it will do, the first step my computer will do, it will request the certificate of my bank. Okay, so my bank has to provide that certificate, we call SSL certificate. Then my computer will, that certificate will contain the details of the bank, that what is a bank, where it is established and stuff like that. And then the certificate will also consist of the public key of that bank. Now my computer will go to the certifying agency. Okay, so there is a certifying agency, CA, right? DigiSign or is one of the agency. So then my computer will go to the certifying agency, provide with the certificate, saying that whether the certificate is valid, is it true? Then the certifying agency will say that yes, this certificate is indeed valid. Then I am assured that, okay, the bank which I am communicating is indeed my bank only and not any intruder. And then any communication between me and the bank happens, it is happened using the secured way by using, so all the messages would be encrypted using public key of the bank, which I received through the certificate, right? And then the bank will send any messages using the private key of itself, right? So that is how the secure communication happens. So this is how the HTTPS is being set up. Public key is being set up in the website. Okay. The other way is that if you, instead of using public key, if you want to connect, right? If you want to connect to any remote server or any remote computer, you can connect it using SSH. So there is a command called SSH. Again, in Linux, you have this command, and then you can type --help. So when you do this, you have, these are the options, SSH, and then you have to provide the name of the host, the port number, and then you also need to provide the key value, right? The public key file. So this file, rd.pub file, you need to specify here. And using that public key, you will be able to connect remotely to this particular server, right? So that would be the same. Yes, it is same on both the thing, but the tools would be different. SSH keygen functionality is native to Linux, but in Windows you will have a different exe to generate keys. You can actually also generate keys using PuTTY software. So PuTTY is actually very famous software for doing this kind of remote secure connections. It is PuTTY, PuTTY. So some of you maybe can look it around. PuTTY. This is a tool that you can use to implement this. Yeah. So okay. So I hope you get the idea of public key, private key. Now let us move ahead. Okay. The next topic is the hash function. The hash function, I already told you that a hash function is a mathematical transform that takes a message of arbitrary length and converts it into a fixed length message or the fixed length block. Okay. So if M is the message, then the hash of the message is going to be equal to HM. What are the property? The property of this hash function is like that. For any M, it is relatively easy to compute H of M. So given M, it is always possible to compute H of M. One way is possible. But given H of M, it is impossible, or rather computationally impossible, to compute the value of M, right? So hash function is actually a non-reversible process. So once you can convert your message into hash, but then you cannot convert your hash back into the message. That is the non-reversible function, right? That is the first property of hash. The second property of hash is that if there are two messages M1 and M2 which are different, then the hash of M1 should also be different than the hash of M2, right? Message में अगर एक bit का भी difference है, I'm saying that even the message differs from each other with a single bit. When I say message, it is basically a binary data, right? So when the binary data is differing even a single bit, then the change in the hash code is very large, right? So that is called the avalanche effect. A single bit change in the message results into a multiple bit change in the hash code. So that is what the property of the hash code is, right? So where do we use hash code? So hash codes are basically used as to verify the integrity of the messages, to attach the code uniquely with the message in such a way that anybody who would like to verify the integrity of the message can be able to do so. So one of the technique for generating a hash code is MAC. We already seen MAC. What is MAC and how to use message authentication code? We have already seen that. So that is what you mean by the message authentication code. Okay. So that is what you mean by the hash function, right? So if somebody, like say for example, you had a message, you can generate the hash code of the message, and then you can encrypt this hash code using the public key of Alice, private key of Alice, and then you can verify that okay, this message is indeed correct by generating the hash code. Hash message is comparing the hash message with the original message, and if they both matches, then you can say that okay, indeed this message is correct, otherwise the message is wrong, right? So you have the message and its hash code, the sended message and the hash code, and what you have here is the received message and its hash code. So if the received message is same as the sended message, then the hash code of the received message should be same as the hash code that you have received, right? So you just compare the hash code here, and if it is matching, then you can make sure that okay, there is no change in the message, the integrity of the message is preserved. So this is basically the use of hash code. The other use of hash code is password authentication, right? So there are issues like people are saving passwords in a plain text form in the database, and if somebody is able to capture the database or somebody is able to get that user information from the database, basically your password is leaked, right? But nowadays, in the current practice, we do not store the password in the plain text form in the database. Rather, what we do is that we store the hash of the password in the database, and then what we do is whenever we want to authenticate the user will be asked to enter the password, and then that password is converted into the hash function, and then the hash of the password is compared with the hash of the password which is stored in the database, right? So the actual database does not contain the password itself, but the actual database only consists of the hash of the password only, right? So we have the hash of the password stored in the database, right? And what does we do, right? User enters a password, and this password is converted into the hash function, and then this hash of the password that is received from the user, and it is compared with the hash of the password which is generated here. So these two values are compared with each other just to make sure that the password is correct. So P1 is a received password. So you generate the hash of the P1, and P is the actual password. So we are not storing the actual password, rather we are only storing the hash of the password, right? So even if these passwords P1 and P are differing by a single bit, then the hash function will not match, and therefore we can say that okay, this is not actually a valid user, or this is not actually a valid authenticated user. So this is one of the use case of where we use the hash function. Okay, so that is called the message hash, right? So now let us try to focus on what are the kind of attacks that are possible on the. So we have seen what are the different cryptographic algorithms, what are the types of cryptographic algorithms. Then let us try to see what are the different kinds of attacks which are possible on the cryptographic algorithms, right? So if you talk about the attacks on the cryptographic algorithm, the very famous kind of attack on the cryptographic algorithm is called the brute force attack. What is a brute force attack? The brute force attack means you try all possible combination of keys. For example, I said that, okay, I could actually decrypt the message, right, by applying the encrypted message, right, along with the key. But I already had an encrypted message. This is available. What is not available to me is the value of key. So what I can do is I can try and generate all possible combination of keys. For example, if my key is 64-bit, right, then I can generate all possible combination of keys and then try to apply those combinations to the decryption process. And then one of the combinations should work because these are the all possible values of keys. 2 raised to 64 is the all possible values of key. Okay. So this process of applying all the possible keys one by one and trying to break the code or trying to get the decrypted message or the original message back from the ciphertext, right? Trying to get the original message or the plain text back from the ciphertext by applying all possible combination of keys. This particular attack is called the brute force attack, and this is one of the widely used attack on various cryptographic algorithms. Right? The other kind of attack is that ciphertext only attack, where the intruder only has the access to ciphertext. They do not have access to plain text, like this one. In the other type of attack, the user has both the value. You have the ciphertext and you also have the corresponding plain text available with you. If this is a case, then you can actually guess the value of keys, right? So you can compare the plain text and ciphertext, and you can guess what is going to be the value of key. So here you do not have to go for trying and find out all possible combination of keys. You can eliminate certain key combinations by comparing the ciphertext value with the corresponding plain text value. So this is called the known plain text ciphertext attack. And the third kind of attack is called the chosen plain text ciphertext attack. So somehow you have one of your contact working in the organization. So what you can do is you can give them a plain text of your choice, and then that person will generate a ciphertext and give it back to you, right? And then using the chosen plain text and ciphertext pair, you try to estimate or you try to infer what is going to be the value of key, right? इसमें normally क्या होता है? The messages are plain text message, right? They contain ABCD, right? Assuming that it is English, then it contains the letter ABCD, right? Any combination of letters and digits. So we know certain properties, like for example, A is the most frequently occurring term, E is the second highest frequently occurring character. So we create a plain text message in such a way that reflecting this property, right? This frequency property of the character is reflected there. And based on that, we generate a ciphertext, and then having this plain text ciphertext message, we try to infer what is going to be the value of key. So these are the different types of attacks: brute force attacks, ciphertext only attack, ciphertext plain text attack, and chosen ciphertext plain text attack. So chosen ciphertext plain text attack means that you get to choose the value of plain text and you get the corresponding ciphertext also, right? Assuming that you have this mechanism to get the corresponding ciphertext also somehow, then your objective is to determine the value of key. So the objective of any cryptanalysis attack is to determine the value of key. कोई भी cryptanalysis attack है, उसका objective क्या होता है? The objective is to determine the value of key. Once you determine the value of key, then all the messages can be decrypted and your algorithm is breached. It is no longer secure. Okay. So what do you mean by a secure algorithm? So secure algorithm is the one where it is not possible to deduce the value of key from ciphertext, or it is not possible to deduce it from ciphertext and plain text pair also. Or even if somebody tries brute force attacks, if somebody is trying all possible key combination, then the size of the key should be such that it is going to take a long time for a particular user to actually deduce the correct value of key, right? So we say that no algorithm is actually completely secure, unconditionally secure, right? I cannot say that, okay, nobody is able to break this algorithm. That is called unconditionally secure. But majority of the algorithms are computationally secure. Computationally secure means what? Yes, the algorithm can be broken up, your key can be deduced, but the time required to deduce the key is more than the validity of the message. See, if somebody would try to apply brute force attack, it will take them 5 years to decrypt the message, right? So within that 5 years, the key would have changed, the message would have changed. So there is nothing common, right? So what we need to make sure is that the time required to break the message or time required to break the key, if that time is more than the validity of the key, or that time is more than the validity of the message itself, then we can say that yes, our algorithm is computationally secure. So even though somebody is able to capture that key, but that key is no longer usable because that key is changed. It is expired already, right? So therefore, most of the algorithms that we see are computationally secure. They are not unconditionally secure. Unconditionally means that nobody can beat it. Doesn't matter whatever amount of resources they use, doesn't matter whatever amount of supercomputers they use, but they are not able to break it, right? So that is something which is very difficult promise to make, okay? So that is the definition. Now you might be surprising that, okay, sir is talking about encryption algorithm, decryption algorithm, and these and that. How these algorithms are made basically, right? What is the content of the algorithm? Is it same as my C++ algorithm? So there are certain building blocks of those algorithms, and most of the algorithms are created by using those building blocks. Anyway, discussing the actual algorithm is beyond the scope of this discussion. I would not be able to do that discussion right now, but I can give you some hints that what are the building blocks, right? So that you get some idea that, okay, what exactly the algorithm is consist of, okay? So any cryptographic algorithm that you design it broadly depends on two types of operation. The one operation is called substitution operation, other operation is called transposition operation. What is a substitution operation? A substitution operation means that you replace one symbol with the other symbol. That is called substitution operation. For example, if this is a message hello, then one way to generate the ciphertext is to replace one character with the other character. Say, for example, H is replaced with K, E is replaced with H, L is replaced with O, L is replaced with O is replaced with R. This is called substitution. So substitution means one character is replaced or one symbol is replaced with the other symbol. And that is how we generate the algorithm, right? So these type of algorithms are called substitution based encryption algorithm or substitution cipher. Sometimes encryption algorithms are also referred as ciphers, right? So we called it substitution ciphers. The other major operation is called the called transposition. What is transposition? So if you know this mapping, right? If you know this mapping that this ciphertext is produced by replacing L with O and stuff like that, so you can reverse produce it, right? So you can actually change it again and you can replace it with the other value and then you can use it out. So if you are having a fixed mapping, right? If you are having, say, for example, the X character is always replaced by X plus 2, right? So what I'm trying to do is that character A is replaced by A plus 2, that is a 2-step advance, right? So A is replaced by 2-step advance. What is 2-step advance? A, B, and C. So A is replaced by C, right? B is replaced by D, up to etc. so on. So this is a fixed mapping, right? So this is sometimes called mono-alpha-lithic cipher because there is a fixed mapping. One character, one-to-one mapping is there. But if one character is replaced by multiple possible characters, then this is called polyalphabetic cipher. In the polyalphabetic ciphers are more complicated than monoalphabetic ciphers. But anyway, these kind of ciphers are called substitution ciphers. The next kind of operation is called, this is an example of Caesar cipher, right? So here the replacement value becomes your key, right? So you say that, okay, the character A is replaced by A plus 15, right? So this displacement value here becomes a key. So if somebody knows the displacement value, they will be again able to convert this back. So if I say H equal to H plus 15, so the code of H is going to replace by H plus 15. So if I want to decrypt it, what do? I simply say the encrypted message minus 15. So here I am doing plus 15, that is encryption. And if I do minus 15, that becomes the decryption, right? So that is how this is done. The next kind of cipher is called the transposition cipher. And in the transposition cipher, we do not replace symbol with the other symbols. Symbols remains as it is, but rather we change the position of the symbols in the text. For example, the first symbol becomes a third symbol, second symbol becomes a first symbol, the third symbol becomes the fourth symbol, and fourth becomes a second symbol. So what is this permutation combination? This becomes your key. So if anybody knows this mapping, that this first symbol is mapped with third and second is mapped with 2 and so on, then you will be able to encrypt and decrypt the message. So you are changing the position of the character within the message. That is called the transposition cipher, right? So you have transposition cipher, you have substitution cipher. Another important operation block in cipher algorithm is called the XOR cipher. What is XOR cipher? XOR cipher means you try to do exclusive OR of the input text with the key value, right? So I think you know the property of XOR, right? If you have A XOR B, and that again XOR B, right, will give you A, right? So I think this property is already known to you, right? A XOR B, and the whole XOR B again, right? So I'm referring this plus sign to be XOR, or maybe I could just simply write it explicitly. A XOR B again, this is going to give you A back, right? So this is the property of XOR operation. So many of the algorithm actually does utilize this property, right? So you will say that A, which is your message, XOR key, which is a secret key, this gives you the encrypted message, and then encrypted message XOR key again, this gives you the original message back, right? So that is called the XOR operation. So XOR is another very widely used operation for encrypting or for doing the encryption process, right? So you have the next is a rotation cipher. So rotation is actually a kind of a transposition cipher, but the transposition is not random. Like for example, here it is random, right? 1 is 3 and 2 is 1 and 3 is 4 and like that. But here the replacement is circular, right? So that is called the rotation cipher. First is replaced at third, and the second is replaced as first, and third is replaced at second, and up to etc. so on. Okay, so these are called rotations. The third operation is called the X box or the compression box operation. So compression box is the idea taken from the multiplexer and demultiplexer. So you have an n-bit input is converted into m-bit output, right? So when you feed this n-bit input, you'll get m-bit output. And when you apply the inverse X, that is you feed m-bit as an input, you again will be getting n-bit output on the other end. So that is multiplexer and demultiplexer kind of thing, right? So multiplexer are used as compressor, demultiplexer are used as expansion mechanism. So these kind of compression and expansion mechanism sometimes referred as S boxes, right? So S box implementation allows you to convert your plain text into some kind of ciphertext, and then by using a corresponding demultiplexer, right, or inverse of the S box, you can actually convert this M output into N inputs, right? So that is how the reverse mapping is possible there. Okay, so you have this compression, P boxes, that is permutation, S boxes, that is compression, expansion, and compression through S boxes. These are some of the building blocks which can be combined in multiple ways. So I'm not saying that XOR is the only operation, permutation or P box is the only operation, expansion and compression, that is S box, is the only operation. It is not like that. It is the combination of these blocks together. So you use an X box, and then you use a P box, and then you use an S box, and then you use an XOR mechanism, and after XOR again you use something else, right? So multiple of these blocks came together to form your algorithm. So when I say algorithm, is nothing but it's a sequence of these steps. So different algorithm apply different steps. Some algorithm do like that. They divide the data into block, right? So if suppose I have 128-bit data, I divide it into 64 and 64. And then I process 64-bit like this, and the lower 64 is processed in the other way. And when it comes to decryption, I do exactly reverse of what I'm doing in the encryption. But ultimately, the encryption and decryption algorithm is consist of this basic building blocks. That is the permutation box, the compression and expansion box, the XOR box, right, or XOR operation. And these operations are performed on the block of data, right? So you have the data is divided into blocks, and then these blocks you are performing various operations, and that is how you are converting your input data into a non-interpretable ciphertext. So what are the names of these this scripted algorithm? So some of the very famously used or well-known secret key or the symmetric key algorithms are DES, triple DES, IDEA, and AES. Right? So triple DES actually is a 64-bit block. It processes 64-bit block, and the key size is 56 bits. So you can see that 56 is a very small number, and it is proven in theory that 64-bit key is vulnerable to exhaustive search, or it is vulnerable to brute force attack. So this particular algorithm is no longer considered secure. People do not use DES algorithm anymore. So in order to increase the strength of this algorithm, हमको क्या करना पड़ेगा? We have to increase the size of key. So in order to increase the size of key, we use 3 different DES algorithm. That is 3 round. The message is encrypted by round 1, then the output of the round 1 is encrypted by round 2, and then the output of the round 2 is encrypted by round 3. So basically you require 3 keys, K1, K2, and K3. So 1 bit is 56 bit. So 3 bits combined together becomes 168-bit key. So now nobody can apply brute force attack, because even if I increase the bit by 1, the 56 to 57, then the amount of effort required to apply brute force will become double. If suppose I was able to crack this algorithm in 5 days, then if I increase the key by only 1 bit, then the effort becomes 10 days, because the number of combination just doubles. Right? So I am increasing it from 56 to 168. So that makes it impossible, literally impossible for somebody to apply the brute force attack. However, this algorithm is very slow. Why it is slow? Because it is using 3 rounds. Right? That is the problem. The other algorithm is IDEA, which is again using a 64-bit data block, and the key size is 128. So therefore, it is reasonably secure. but nobody has published any attack or any weakness on this algorithm, right? It is considered to be secured for now, right? But it is protected by patent. What does it mean? That you cannot use this algorithm directly. You have to pay a fee to that agency for using this algorithm. So therefore, this algorithm is not available in public, right? So what is the algorithm available today in public? That is called the AES algorithm. That is called the Advanced Encryption Standard Algorithm. It uses 128-bit data block. The key size is also 128-bit, 192 and 256. There are 3 possible key size. But even with the smallest key size of 128-bit, it is fairly secure. Nobody has applied any successful attack on this algorithm. And this algorithm is open source. That is, this algorithm is free to use by anybody. So therefore, the National Security Agency or NSA has stated that this is the secure enough algorithm for any kind of non-classified data, and therefore most of the technique or most of the encryption that we see today, they are almost always using AES algorithm. So these are the different algorithms for secret key. Secret key means same key for public and private. Same key for encryption and decryption. For public key cryptography, that is having different keys, private key and public key, there is only one algorithm, and that is called RSA algorithm. RSA is the only algorithm that exists today to implement the public key cryptography. And fortunately, this algorithm is secured enough so that nobody is able to break that up. So you can see here that this keys that I have generated, these keys are called ID_RSA, ID_RSA, like that. Why it is RSA? Because it is generated using RSA algorithm. What is that RSA algorithm? So RSA algorithm goes like this. First of all, you have to select 2 prime numbers, P and Q. Then you have to compute 2 values, N and phi, where N is generated using P multiplied by Q, multiplication of 2 prime numbers. Phi value is generated by P minus 1 and N minus 1, multiplication of that. And now you have to choose some value, E, which is in between 1 to 5. So this value E you have to choose. That value has to be between 1 to 5. You can choose it that to be a private key. Now once you select this E, then you have to compute the value of D in such a way that E raised to D mod phi is equal to 1. Right? Again, I'm saying you have to select 2 prime numbers P and Q. You have to compute the value of N. You have to compute the value of phi. And then you have to select E as a private key between 1 to 5. And then you have to compute D. How do I compute D? E raised to D mod phi, modulus operator. So that should give me 1. So any value D which gives me this, that becomes my public key. And then the encryption is carried out. For example, this P is my message. P is my message. Then encryption is carried out by P raised to E mod N. So what does it mean? It means that I am encrypting using my private key E, P raised to E mod N. So every message or every character or every word, I mean, I can select the block length, 16-bit or something, so that every word is encrypted like this, word raised to E mod N. So that gives me a new word of the encrypted message. Right? And then how do I decrypt it? Again, C raised to the encrypted message or encrypted word D C raised to D mod N. So that gives me the plain text word back. Okay, you can take an example here. For example, 2 prime numbers are 7 and 11. P is equal to 7, Q equal to 11. So N is computed as 7 into 11, 77. Phi is computed as P minus 1, Q minus 1, that is 6 into 10, 60. Now I have to select one key or one value between 1 to 60. Let's say I have selected value equal to 13. And once I selected 13, I have to compute some D such a way that 13 raised to D mod 60 is equal to 1. So that such value is 37. So you can compute this. I mean, I don't have time to compute and verify this all. But anyway, this PPT is there on your Google Classroom. You can go and verify by yourself. You can take up a calculator. You can compute this value and you can verify. So one such value is 37. That 13 raised to 37 mod 60 equal to 1. Okay. So that is how you can verify this. And then take up a plain text, say the plain text value is equal to 2. So I'm just taking a hex or a decimal value of a word, and then 2 raised to 13. This gives me the encrypted value. And then I can get from the encrypted value, I can get the decrypted value back. So this is the encrypted value. 2 is encrypted to 30. And then if I do 30 raised to 37, I'll again get back value 2. So that is how the RSA algorithm is working. So if you encrypt using public key, then you can decrypt using private key. If you encrypt using private key, then you can decrypt using public key. Okay. This might seems to be very simple to you, but let me give you the real-time example. So in real time, this is the value of P. In real world, when I generate this key, right? I show you this key. When I generate this key, the value of P used is like this. This is the value of P. This is the prime number. This is a single prime number, huh? It is not a sequence of number. Hope that makes sense. Who is this? Arshad Vora. Please keep your mic on mute mode. Arshad Vora is required to keep their mic on the mute mode. I don't know whether he is listening to me or what. This is the value of P. This is the value of Q. This is a single number. This is a single number. Okay. So when I say P multiplied by Q, this is the value of N do I get. This is again a single number. It's a 309 digit number. Right. So when you tend to implement this, your simple multiplication operation that you see in your programming language is not going to work, because it is not going to handle this much large numbers. Okay. So this is the actual value of N. This is the actual value of phi. And then this is the value of E, which is selected 35535. It can be any huge number between 1 to this 5. But I have selected a smaller one here, but you can select any random number between this. And this is the corresponding value of the public key. So as you can see here, also, this is my private key. And then I can have the corresponding value of the public key. These are very huge, right, in terms of number. Okay. So this is not some 3, 4, 5 digit number. It's a very huge number represented in a sequence of bytes. Okay. So that is the case. So that is how the RSA algorithm is working. So I hope I try to touch upon a surface or try to scratch upon the surface of encryption, decryption. What are the different encryption, decryption algorithms? What are the primitive operators that we are doing on encryption and decryption? What is the RSA algorithm for public key and private key? Right? So with this, I'll stop today. Now the only thing remaining here is the firewall, right? Network security and firewall, which we try to finish tomorrow. So tomorrow is going to be our last class. Okay. So yes, if you have anything to share or anything to say, you can come up with it. I'll try to finish off the network security or the last topic, that is the firewall topic. I tend to finish off in the class tomorrow. But anyway, if you have anything to share here or any doubt related to encryption and decryption, you can definitely raise your doubts there. Otherwise, you are free to leave the class. What is DDoS? That is called distributed denial of service attack. So what do you mean by denial of? So these are the topics related to network security. These are not topics related to information security. I hope you try to understand now There is something called system security. You might have heard about Trojan horse, right? Virus, worms. These are the attacks which are possible on the system security. These are the threats to the system security. This phishing attack, denial of service, DDoS or DOS attack, these are the attacks on the network security.